rain fell steadily, drumming against the cracked pavement and slick rooftops of the old part of town. Detective Paul Carter stood beneath the flickering neon sign of an abandoned diner, the chill of the damp air seeping through his coat. The city around him was a patchwork of shadows and flickering lights, a place where forgotten secrets hid in the cracks of time. This case was unlike any he had seen before. The disappearances that plagued his neighborhood were more than random acts. They carried a weight, a pattern that didn't fit the usual criminal profile. Residents whisper strange lights flickering through boarded-up windows, and eerie sounds that seemed to echo from empty streets. The silence of the missing was deafening. Paul's eyes traced the outline of the old warehouse across the street. Its windows shattered and dark, except for a faint orange glow that seemed out of place. The air felt heavy, thick with the residue of things long buried. As he stepped inside, the scent of dust, mold, and something older, ancient and metallic, filled his lungs. On a worn wooden table lay an old book, its leather cover cracked and etched with symbols that defied understanding. The pages seemed to flutter as if caught in an unseen breeze, though the air was still. A chill crawled down Paul's spine, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. The room itself seemed to breathe, alive with secrets that refused to stay hidden. Outside, the rain hammered down like a warning from the past, a reminder that some shadows were better left undisturbed. Back at the precinct, Paul carefully laid the book on his desk. The dim fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting elongated shadows across the room. The smell of mold clung to the pages, and the strange symbols twisted and turned under his gaze like cryptic puzzles waiting to be solved. Though Alex Monroe, his partner, had noticed the same patterns in the recent disappearances, the book was their first tangible clue, a thread to pull on in the tangled web. The steady ringing of the phone broke the silence. The report was grim. Another body had been discovered in the same neighborhood, marked by strange cuts and symbols etched into the skin. The city's dark heart was pulsing louder, and Paul knew this case was far from over. Chapter 2. Echoes beneath the surface. Days blended into restless nights as Paul delved deeper into the investigation. The old city streets, once familiar, now felt alien. Shadows stretching longer, the glow of streetlights casting uncertain shapes in rain-soaked alleys. The city seemed to breathe stories lost time, whispers barely audible beneath the hum of everyday life. The ancient book lay open on his desk, its cryptic symbols weaving intricate patterns that defied explanation. These signs echoed the language of forgotten cults, long erased from modern memory, yet somehow alive in this place. Paul sensed that this book was not merely a clue. It was a key to unlocking a truth too vast to ignore. In homes and apartments across the neighborhood, a creeping unease took hold. Residents reported dreams filled with shadowy figures watching silently from the darkness, a presence felt but unseen. The boundary between reality and nightmare blurred. Paul's own grip on reality began to falter. Fatigue gnawed at his mind. Sleep became elusive. Strange flickers of light danced at the edges of his vision. Cold drafts brushed his neck unbidden. These things could not be explained by logic alone. The mystical was seeping into the core of the case. At sites of recent disappearances, strange markings marred the walls, scratches and symbols carved or traced in dust, messages in a language known only to a select few, silent calls, daring Paul to decipher them. Deep down, he understood this was no ordinary crime. This was a stirring of something ancient, dark, and relentless. The shadows of the past had returned, and they refused to fade away. Chapter 3. The Weight of Secrets. Exhaustion became a constant companion as the case tangled further. Paul uncovered unsettling connections, powerful local figures involved in what had been dismissed as mere legend, a secret order manipulating fear and faith alike, pulling strings behind the city's facade. Unseen eyes tracked his every move. Calls went unanswered. Encounters in shadow corners left him questioning what or who was truly watching. The line between ally and enemy blurred. In his personal life, the gulf between him and his daughter widened, each passing day pulling them further apart. Loneliness wrapped around him, heavy and suffocating. Mysticism and crime intertwined in a knot growing tighter with every revelation. Paul knew that to uncover the truth, he would have to confront not only tangible foes, but also the demons lurking within himself. Chapter 4. Beneath the surface. The city wore its secrets like a second skin, one that refused to peel away no matter how many times Paul tried to scrape at it. Every street corner, every cracked sidewalk whispered of hidden histories. The air was thick with something unseen, a presence that weighed heavier with each passing day. Paul's investigation led him to the edges of the city's forgotten past. Old newspaper clippings, yellowed and brittle, told tales of disappearances decades ago, eerily similar to the ones happening now. Names long buried in the public memory resurfaced, tied to rumors of ritual gatherings and strange ceremonies held under moonless nights. As Paul sifted through fragments, a pattern emerged, a web of influence spun by a secretive group intent on preserving their power through dark means. Their reach extended into City Hall, law enforcement, even the very precinct Paul called home. Trust became a fragile commodity. The book, with its indecipherable runes, became an obsession. Paul found himself waking in cold sweats, the cryptic symbols etched behind his eyelids. His dreams were invaded by flickering flames and chanting voices, the boundaries between waking and sleeping blurring. The line between reality and nightmare grew thinner. Shadows stretched longer, moving just beyond the edge of vision. The weight of unseen eyes pressed down relentlessly, and Paul knew the city's darkness was far from extinguished. Chapter 5. The fractured mind. Isolation crept in, hollowing out the spaces where hope once lived. Paul's nights were restless battles against unseen forces, his days spent chasing clues that dissolved like mist. The city's pulse beat erratically, mirroring his own unraveling, his connection to his daughter Frayed, leaving an ache that no case file could soothe. Memories of simpler times were distant echoes beneath the storm raging in his mind. The secret order symbols began to appear in unexpected places, scrawled on walls, whispered in coded graffiti, even tattooed on the skin of those who vanished. The ritualistic marking spoke of power and sacrifice, of a darkness older than the city itself. Paul realized that to stop the cycle, he would have to confront not only the human agents of the shadow, but the ancient forces they sought to awaken. The investigation was no longer just a search for missing persons. It was a battle for the soul of the city. Chapter 6. Veins of the Forgotten. The city changed subtly, as if reacting to Paul's persistence. Familiar streets took on new shapes. Alleys seemed deeper, buildings older. Graffiti no longer looked like random tags, but ancient glyphs buried beneath layers of paint and time. The decay wasn't just physical, it was spiritual, rooted in something that pulsed just below the surface. Paul began tracking locations of the disappearances on an old map of the city, and a chilling pattern emerged. Each incident formed a point along a precise geometric grid, a shape rooted in occult symbology, aligned with celestial events from centuries past. This was not random. This was design. Public records offered little. Files had been scrubbed. Names were missing. Dates blacked out. But Paul found traces in forgotten archives. Birth certificates tied to long-dead families. Sealed court cases that hinted at disappearances, mass hysteria, and ritualism dating back nearly 100 years. He visited one of the older sites, a collapsed church now half swallowed by weeds and vines. Time had cracked its stone walls, but beneath the rot was something preserved. In the basement, hidden behind a panel of warped wood, Paul discovered a stone altar, etched with the same symbols from the book. Wax melted into the floor. The smell of ash and iron clung to the air. The presence in the room was unmistakable, not malevolent, not benign, simply aware, watching, waiting. Chapter 7. Blood in the Foundation. The deeper Paul went, the more the city pushed back. A former city engineer's private journal, found in a condemned house, revealed horrifying entries. Notes describe dead zones beneath certain neighborhoods where no electrical systems worked, no plants grew, and dreams became infected with visions of fire and stone. One entry ended mid-sentence, smeared in something dark that had soaked through several pages. Paul's body began to wear the strain. His hands trembled, his vision blurred around the edges. He stopped sleeping entirely, choosing instead to pace his apartment during the hours just before dawn, when the silence grew loudest. There were nights when the symbols in the book began to shimmer faintly, reacting to his proximity, and once in the reflection of a darkened window, Paul saw his own face watching him, not mimicking his movements, but studying him with unreadable intent. Still, he pressed on. Chapter 8, The Hollow Circle. The pattern of disappearances began to close. One final location remained, a water treatment facility, shut down 30 years ago after a chemical spill. The public had forgotten it, but the order had not. Beneath the facility was a labyrinth of maintenance tunnels, long, dry, and overgrown with roots. Paul followed the grid map from the book, stepping deeper into the earth. The air grew colder. The walls narrowed. His flashlight pulsed and dimmed like a heartbeat, barely illuminating the strange carvings along the walls, a sequence that mirrored the altar beneath the church. At the center of the facility lay a stone circle, half buried beneath soil and brick. In its grooves were dried remnants of wax, blood, and bone, left behind not in violence, but in ritual. Something had been summoned here once. Or perhaps something had been locked away. Paul stood alone in the dark, unsure whether he had uncovered the truth or simply peeled back a layer no one was ever meant to see. Chapter 9, The Breach. After the water facility, the city was no longer the same, or perhaps Paul was seeing for what it had always been. The buildings looked bruised, as if bearing the weight of something pressing in from above. Birds no longer sang at dawn. People walked faster. Windows stayed closed even on warm nights. Paul gathered everything. Notes, maps, sketches, translated fragments from a book. When laid out together, the truth became impossible to ignore. The disappearances weren't isolated events. They were sacrifices. Each incident marked a point in a ritual design that spanned decades. Each victim was a thread woven into a larger spell, one that had yet to be completed. The book, long dormant, began to act of its own will. Pages flipped without touch. Ink shifted, reshaping itself into new symbols Paul couldn't understand. Not yet, but he felt them, like echoes moving through his blood, drawing him towards something beneath language, beneath logic. Reports from the morgue confirmed his worst fear. The latest body had carvings not just etched into the skin, but into the bone. The symbols were identical to those found beneath the church. It was no longer theory. It was proof. The order wasn't hiding, it was preparing. The final convergence was close. A celestial alignment, predicted in the book, would occur in 3 nights. A gateway was forming, and Paul wasn't sure if it was meant to be opened or kept shut. Chapter 10, The Unseen Gate. The convergence site was buried beneath the old Glassworks district, a place once sealed off after a mysterious fire had gutted a dozen blocks in a single night. Official records blamed faulty wiring. Unofficially, no one spoke of it. Paul entered through a breach in the earth, where a sinkhole had cracked open asphalt and exposed the pass like a wound. Beneath layers of soot and ash, the tunnels widened into a cavern of glassy stone. The walls shimmered faintly, reflecting light that wasn't there. The floor was covered in concentric circles, carved deep into the bedrock. The altar stood in the center, larger than the one beneath the church. Around it were remnants of robes, old candles, empty vessels. At the edge of the circle was a small mound of earth, recently disturbed. Paul didn't have to dig far. The body was fresh. The book pulsed in his coat, growing warm. Paul opened it with trembling hands. The pages had changed again, no longer filled with symbols, but with a drawing. The altar, the glass cavern, the stars above, and a figure standing in the center. Him. He was no longer just the investigator. He was now part of the ritual. Chapter 11, Flesh and Fire. The night of the convergence arrived with no warning. The sky above the city turned sickly gray, clouds swirling in unnatural shapes. The stars aligned not as points of light, but as slits in the sky, thin, sharp, watching. The streets fell silent. The usual sound of traffic, chatter, dogs barking, all gone. The city held its breath. Deep beneath the ruins of the glassworks, Paul stood before the altar, the book cradled in one arm, his other hand trembling from exhaustion and dread. The floor beneath him pulsed faintly, like something living. The symbols carved into the stone began to glow, slow at first, then faster, pulsing with rhythm, heat, and hunger. Paul understood now. He wasn't the first to stand here. There had been many before him, each led by truth, by grief, by duty. each brought to the same threshold. The Order didn't need to complete the ritual themselves. They just needed someone to bring the final piece. Someone who believed they could stop it. Paul had brought the book. He had traced the signs. He had come to the center willingly. The circle was complete. The air fractured with a sound like splintering bone. Light poured from the altar, but it wasn't light. It was memory, ancient and full of pain. It burned without heat, showing the world not as it was, but as it had once been, raw, wild, filled with old gods that had only been sleeping. Paul screamed, but no sound left his throat. His body remained rooted, but his mind fell. He felt himself unravel, thought by thought, memory by memory, a life undone. The gateway opened, and something stepped through. Chapter 12. The collapse. 3 days later, the city returned to life, outwardly unchanged. Commuters returned to their routines. Police reports resumed. Children played, but something was wrong. Subtly, quietly, in the way people avoided certain streets, in the way reflections flickered differently in mirrors. Paul was never found. The investigation into his disappearance was brief, unceremonious. His apartment was cleared, his file sealed. The book was gone, but in the depths of the city, far beneath stone and soil, the altar remained. Fresh markings had begun to appear, etched slowly by invisible hands. The circle pulsed again, faintly, as if breathing. The Order had vanished from public sight, but their purpose had been fulfilled, not in victory, but in continuation. They didn't need to control the world. They only needed the door open, just a little,